Welcome, everyone, to this RISE Critical Conversation on sports, race, and police community relations. My name is Diane Billings Burford, and I'm the CEO of RISE, a not for profit educating and empowering the sports community to eliminate racism, champion social justice, and improve race relations. We have the bold vision of creating a nation unified through sport, committed to racial equity and social justice. To create that one united America, we know that it's going to take intentional action from all of us. This panel today will highlight the systemic issues affecting communities, inform the work that needs to be done to address police violence, and provide actionable steps that we can all take to make our country more equitable. This is the first of a series of critical conversations that RISE will be hosting across the country throughout the year to recognize victims of racism and police violence and rally the sports community and Americans everywhere to be effective change agents. Today, we bring our conversation to Minnesota, where 1 year ago, George Floyd was tragically murdered. And less than a month ago, America took a small step towards justice when ex-officer Derek Chauvin was convicted for the murder on all 3 counts. And now, additionally, he and the other 3 officers face federal charges as well. Partnering with RISE for this conversation is the National Urban League, as well as the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx organizations. Joining us from the Lynx is Sylvia Fowles, one of the WNBA's all-time greatest players and an athlete who represents the activist spirit of the Minnesota Lynx and Timberwolves organizations, as their players have been champions and leaders of change for years. The organization has established a robust partnership with RISE, including sponsoring town halls, supporting multi-week programming for the community, and having internal sessions to educate themselves to promote racial equity in their communities. Also joining us from the organization today is True Pettigrew, the Vice President of Player Programs and Diversity and Inclusion for the Timberwolves. True also serves as a subject matter expert on engaging diverse communities for the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. Mark Morial joins our panel, and Mark is the president and the CEO of the National Urban League, the nation's largest historic civil rights and urban advocacy organization. And completing our panel is the Honorable Congress Member Karen Bass, the lead author of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which is the largest and most expansive piece of police reform ever to pass a chamber of Congress. She represents Culver City, California, and parts of Los Angeles in the House of Representatives. I'm excited to get started, and I think a great place to begin is for us to set the table and drill down on the problems communities are facing by detailing personal experiences some of you have had. So I'd like to ask you all, and True, I'd like to ask you to start. One of the things we really seek to do is to offer the opportunity for folks to share lived experiences so we can, provide context to the issues that are facing our community. Can you share any lived experiences that you've had with racism or police violence or witnessing acts of violence and a bit about how it's impacted you?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for the question. And again, thank you for having us. I've had a pretty strained relationship with law enforcement most of my adult life up until 2014 is when it actually changed. But growing up in Baltimore, where I grew up in West Baltimore, I was on the receiving end of excessive force pretty regularly, to the point where me and my friends normalized it. It was a lot of drugs, violence, and crime in the neighborhood where I grew up. And the police that policed that neighborhood seemingly policed it in a very heavy-handed way. And it just applied to all of us, whether we were those bad actors or not. And then when I lived in LA for a period of time, I lived in the Crenshaw district, and I remember coming out of a 7-Eleven and several police approached me. One grabbed me, threw me to the ground, had his knee in my back, and had his my face pressed against the blacktop of the parking lot, gun pressed against the side of my head, threatening and taunting to shoot me. His words were, "Give me a reason, I wish you would." And it turned out that it was a case of mistaken identity. And so I've had some pretty, strained and traumatic experiences with law enforcement.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Sylvia or Mark or Congressmember Bass, would any of you like to share?
Yes, my experience is something like Coach True's. Growing up in the inner city in Miami, we always had this relationship with cops. And I can just remember at a young age just going to the store, the corner store. And before we can enter, we had to show them that we actually had money to go in to buy things that we wanted to get. And I'm just like, well, why do you come to the store? Like, apparently we have something to get, but it became a norm for us too. We kind of normalized it as well. And I can also recall around middle school sometime, one of my cousins was shot by police from mistaken identity as well.
Wow. And the sad thing is, I thank you for sharing. And the sad thing is, right, like we're here because these are systemic issues.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many that have these stories. You guys are the rule and not the exception, right? And that's what makes it systemic. That's what makes it a pervasive issue.
I think this is a really important. So when I first moved to the New York area, we moved after being here 2 years to northern New Jersey. And I was with my son at the time, 4 years old, in a car seat in the back of my personal vehicle, driving through downtown Newark, because I was taking my son to a birthday party that I really didn't know really where it was, but I was trying to find my way around. And a motorcycle police officer stopped us. The officer came up to the car. This is important because this is how confrontations potentially happen. I rolled my window down. Without saying anything, he began barking at me by saying, "Why did you run that red light back there? I want to know why you ran the red light back there." I looked him in the eyes and did not say a word. He kept barking. I didn't say a word. Finally, I said, "Officer, may I?" I said, "Officer, you should do the job you've been trained to do." He looked at me. He didn't say a word. I said, "You know what you've been trained to do." Finally, he said, "May I have your driver's license, registration, and insurance?" I looked at him and I said, "That's the job you've been trained to do." He came back. He nervously gave me my driver's license, registration, and insurance card back and said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" I said, "No, I'm just a little bit lost because I'm new to the area." I said, "But I think I'll be okay. You have a great day." And I went on. What's the point? The way he approached me. Now I'm a lawyer who has cross-examined hundreds of cops. I was a mayor who led a police reform effort and lectured at the police academy 25 times. And I knew the minute he approached me that everything he was trained to do, he had violated. I also knew that he was seeking to provoke a confrontation, seeking to provoke an argument. I'm the president of a national civil rights organization. I'm a former mayor of a major American city. I'm an experienced lawyer, and at the time I must have been, I don't know, late 40s, early 50s, probably late 40s. And I'm being stopped, and I've got an officer white male officer barking at me on a Sunday with no traffic on the street about allegedly running a red light. So I only point that out as a personal experience that happened most recently because it underscores how the way officers sometimes talk to people becomes confrontational and provocative. And most of these officers, they don't spend enough time in these police academies teaching people how to talk to people.
Right, and I think it points out, right, that the common denominator in all of these stories is race. You know, Sylvia shares with us her experience as a child and as a teenager. True is
Right.
talking about being a young person. One is a woman, one is a man, different parts of the country. You're talking about being an older person, in a car, out of car, wherever. But the common factor is race and it's police interaction. And so I wonder, Congresswoman, if you could share with us, I think that there are some historical challenges, right, between these two communities, our communities of color and our law enforcement community. I would love if you would share what you think the largest, either the single largest challenge in that relationship is, or a few of the largest challenges in that relationship. And I suspect many of them have historical roots. You know, this didn't just start now. It's been a part of us.
Sure, but let me begin by sharing my own experience because I think it's different. I went through years of harassment from the Los Angeles Police Department, and I don't know when you were there, True. I don't know who was chief at the time, but we had a notorious police chief, Daryl Gates, who felt like he was J. Edgar Hoover, and so anybody that was a political activist, they harassed us. They came to our jobs. They vandalized my car, broke into my house. I mean, threatened you. And we didn't feel that we could go to the press. We didn't feel we could tell anybody. But I was, as a matter of fact, the year that George Floyd was born in 1973, I belonged to an organization called the Coalition Against Police Abuse because the police just killed so many people in Los Angeles. And it wasn't until Rodney King that we thought it was all going to be taken care of because finally there was a videotape that proved what was happening when no one would believe us before. And so every time we would come together to protest brutality or a killing, the police would come after us. And which is why I have been highly sensitive to the Black identity extremist category that the FBI came up with, because what I was going through was right on the tail end of COINTELPRO. So, you know, I grew up as a kid watching activists, murdered. And, you know, the movie's out now about Fred Hampton, Judas and the Black Messiah. So they would infiltrate our groups. They would be agent provocateurs. I've told the folks in Black Lives Matter that when the people are out during and creating civil unrest, you need to know who they are, which side are they on, because they might be from a white supremacist group acting like they're an ally, or they might be a Black person acting like they're an ally, and they actually were put there specifically to create violence. So in terms of its historical roots, well, you know, the history of policing goes back to the period of enslavement. And so the first police were the people that were out capturing our ancestors who fled the plantation, or capturing freed Black Americans and bringing them into slavery. And so I think from its earliest days, policing has been about controlling the behavior of Black people. If you're going to talk about the Black codes that were enacted after the period of enslavement ended, that essentially criminalized basic behavior of Black folks. You know, something that I think we could use, Mark, is we need videotapes of white people misbehaving and how the police deal with it. I saw one where the guy in the car pulled the gun on the cop. and the cop is sitting there trying to talk him out of his gun. Basically, what people say is the reason why Black people get killed is because we misbehave. So you need to teach your people how to behave. That's hogwash.
Well, January 6th taught us all that that's not actually what needs to happen.
Exactly.
You can actually completely misbehave
Amen.
and everybody come out pretty much okay.
And many of those people on January 6th were police officers.
Yeah,
In the military.
yeah. Thank you for that historical perspective. One of the things I said at the top is we have these conversations. We think it's important for folks to share their actual lived experiences, but it's also really important for us at RISE to make sure that what we do is solutions oriented. And we're explicitly going to come back to what are actionable steps, right? This is going to take action from everyone. So please be ready for that, because we need that for this to be complete, you know, for what we're doing to have as much impact. Looking at the historical perspective and our current experiences in this space, and now two people already have mentioned George Floyd, and True and Sylvia, you guys you're with the Timberwolves, you're with the Lynx, you are in Minnesota. And so I wonder if you could share with us, for a lot of the country, when that guilty verdict came through against Derek Chauvin on the 3 counts, there were different responses across the country, but I wonder if you all could share with us just the response and what was happening in Minneapolis at that time.
So I was just getting back into Minneapolis from Florida. We was just getting started with training camp. So our coaches pretty much got us all on Zoom, and we pretty much briefed if things go left, what are our next options? Because we right here in the city. And so I actually was unpacking. Then when she said that, I had to repack just in case we had to relocate. But the city did great. After hearing that verdict, everybody responded well, and it was actually a good feeling to see Minneapolis act in a good manner. And so I was very happy about how we handled it and the good response that we got from everybody across the city. So it was amazing to see.
Awesome.
And it was very similar on the Timberwolves side. Excuse me. We were in Sacramento on the road. We were on a road trip at the time, and we had a game against Sacramento that very day. And once we heard that the jury had reached a verdict, we gathered the team, we shared and briefed the team that a verdict had been reached. And so some decided to stay together in a meeting room, in a conference room or the hotel where we were. Others went to their rooms to all watch the verdict. And then we were on standby, not sure whether or not we would head back to Minneapolis or not. And some of the concerns that were expressed is because we actually were on standby, considering that there may not be a guilty charge on all counts, I think speaks to the climate of our society, that was even a consideration for us all.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a contingency plan in place as to how we would reroute and versus coming back to Minneapolis. And after we all heard the verdict, we shared and connected again. And it was a feeling of relief because people's families were still in Minneapolis.
Yes.
People were concerned about the safety of their families if there were to be any sort of demonstrations or unrest. And we've all heard the operative word of accountability. And I believe there was a sense of relief that this is a step forward, that maybe things can and will be different from an accountability standpoint moving forward. That was the general consensus of the team members and the staff after hearing the verdict.
Yeah, we thank you for that. We talk so much about the impact of racism. You know, we often talk about the acts, racist acts, but it's important to understand the impact of racist acts, right? To think about how much energy, whether you're thinking about it from a business perspective, a government perspective, think about how much energy had to go into that moment, everybody waiting to see what would happen. Money spent, time spent, energy spent, emotion spent across the country,
Yeah.
over this one act. And so it really doesn't, not only is it wrong, but it really doesn't add value for anyone. Congresswoman, you mentioned Rodney King, and one of the things I know that a lot of my peers, we were of a certain age when that video came out. Even though I'm a Brooklyn girl and I'm on the East Coast, right? It touched the entire country. And I literally felt like I knew that we had reached a cultural revolution in this country when I had white men, quite honestly, privileged, straight, every form of privilege you can think of, that said, I'm not sure why this one felt different. I watched Rodney King and I still felt like maybe the police had a reason to do it, but this one just felt completely different. And then that happened obviously far before the trial, but it made me think maybe we are at this point of revolution. But beyond how folks feel, I'd love if you could share, I mentioned in the intro how you are the leading author on the George Floyd Policing Reform Act. If you could share some of the concrete changes that you think are required, the types of things that you think need to happen in policing in communities that can stop us from just being in these situations.
Well, first of all, in the bill, the first part of the bill holds officers accountable. You remember how Derek Chauvin was just looking at the camera? He knew he was being filmed. He didn't even care because he felt he could get away with it. So it didn't occur to him he could be sued or he would be fired. And so holding an officer accountable by allowing the officer to be sued or allowing the officer to be prosecuted, because right now the bar to prosecute an officer is so high. That's why the community gets upset, because they'll see something that happens and then they find out that charges weren't even brought. And so a lot of times the community might react and might think, well, that's one racist individual that didn't file charges, without realizing that it's actually very difficult to file charges because the bar is so high. So we need to lower the bar so that an officer could be charged. When we talk about professionalizing policing in the United States, we have 18,000 police departments and 18,000 different ways to go about policing. Just like any profession, you should have national standards and transparency. Well, those officers that were alongside of Derek Chauvin, in our bill, they could be prosecuted because they should have a duty to intervene. Now, the federal government is going after them, but if the federal government wasn't there, I don't know that they would be held accountable for not intervening.
Right.
And we should ban chokeholds. We should ban no-knock warrants. There needs to be a registry where bad officers are listed. So for example, when Daunte Wright was killed, like a couple of days before the verdict, that officer, the one that had 26 years experience, but didn't know the difference between her gun and the taser, well, she resigned. All she has to do is go up the street and apply for a job at another department. We don't think she should be in policing at all. And so those are some parts of the bill. One part of the bill also provides grants to communities to begin to re-envision public safety. What do communities need to be kept safe? Sometimes it's not always police. If you dealt with people who have mental health crises by taking care of them on the front end, maybe you wouldn't call police. Or if you need to call somebody, maybe you should call a social worker instead of a police officer. So that gives you a sweeping overview of the bill.
And I wanna add that Leader Bass, Congresswoman Bass, has been from the very beginning, from Jump Street, when she chaired the Congressional Black Caucus last year, and we convened on the phone right after George Floyd's death, the driving energy behind the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And we're plowing ahead to get a substantial, meaningful bill passed. But I want to make this observation. There is no bill that Congress can pass that will, with a magic wand,
Thank you.
fix these problems, because fundamentally, policing is a function of local government. It's a function of a city government, a town government, a county government where you have sheriffs, And its regulatory framework is controlled by cities and to some extent states. Where the federal government comes in is with its overriding responsibility to protect the constitutional rights of its citizens. So we have to address what needs to be done at the national level, which is what the George Floyd bill does, which is what we expect Merrick Garland and Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark to be able to do at the Justice Department, to use those powers, use those tools. But then at the local level, activists and elected officials and mayors and others have to be engaged to address this. The National Urban League has promulgated our 21 Pillars plan, 21 Pillars for reimagining and re-envisioning public safety and restoring community trust. A number of what's in that plan are in the George Floyd bill, but there are things that have to be done at the local level. And this is where you need continuous pressure. If you're going to change the way in which union collective bargaining agreements operate, if you're going to change the way hiring is undertaken, if you're going to change use of force policies, I'm saying to those who are listening, it's about the Congress and what the Congress and the president can do, but it is about what has to be done at the local level.
I would add to that. I couldn't agree more. It's about the federal level. It's about the local level. And listen, I lead RISE. So I obviously also think it's about this sports ability to impact issues,
Yes.
right? And so, my question was gonna be, why do you guys, Sylvia and True, believe that sports can be effective in this space? I think 2020 showed us hands down just how effective, right? In recent history, we've had so many instances in the past, but I think we really stepped up this year to show the impact that the sports world can have. But I'd love to get your thoughts on it. We know the athletes have a special platform. Any thoughts on what athletes can continue to do in this instance to push this work forward? I'd love to just open that up and ask you to share any thoughts you have on that.
Well, I sure would like to jump in. Yes, athletes can play an absolutely critical role. And I will just tell you, I just want to thank all the athletes for what has happened so far, because the athletes have taken Black Lives Matter, Breonna Taylor, Eric Gardner, all of the names of the people that we've lost, and they've breathed life into them. So there's not just a name on a picket sign, but when you guys wear those names, when they show up on the field or the court, what you're doing is you're socializing the general public that's not sitting there watching the news, that this is important. And so the cultural leadership that you have in the country and the people that listen to you. So the specific role that could be played now is to elevate it through your social media by talking about pieces of the policy. So the names socialize folks to the tragedies, but now what is the solution? So saying things like banning no-knock, banning, chokeholds, hold police accountable if they commit a crime. I'm not saying this as to what the slogans are. There is actually something we can send you that tries to capture it. But people in the public need to understand that there are solutions. Because if you don't see it from the point of view of policy, then you're reduced down into, we just need to train all Black people to, how to behave with police. And that's just so offensive, to say we need to train us like we're dogs, that if we behaved properly, we wouldn't be killed. So I don't know when responding back to a provocation should equal being executed. I don't understand that. That's why I was saying we need to gather all these videos of white folks completely misbehaving and not getting killed.
Absolutely. Sylvia, I think you were getting ready to share.
Yeah. I think we can just continue to just educate the people. Like you said, not too many people watch the news, right? And so a lot of people follow us because of the name that we have and the platform that we are on. So making sure we educate them on what can you do locally. These are the orders that you need to take, and having them understand that it's a process to everything that goes on locally, statewide, and things like that. But also not being afraid to put yourself in those shoes. Especially for me, I still have a good amount of family who stays in the hood, and so these things hit close to home. Not being shameful or prideful to like actually put myself in these places to hear these stories, so I can put these stories out so everybody can understand that it's not just those people who go through those things, but these stories do hit home closely.
Yeah, and to build on what Sylvia just shared, it's the platform is really one of the most powerful tools that I believe athletes have the opportunity to, one, elevate the conversation so that the conversation does not fade away after an incident has taken place, after the cameras and the news media have left, to elevate the conversation, keep the conversation going, but also increase reach and impressions with those positive messages of accountability, because the athletes are modern day media properties and themselves with their social media reach and their social media platforms. And they have traditional media access on a regular basis. So it's leveraging those platforms and then also kind of getting in where they fit in and leveraging their own passions, if you will, to affect change in all of the social institutions of our society, because there's so many social determinants of crime, of health, of discrimination, whether it's financial institutions, faith-based institutions, media, as we talked about, health and human services institutions. So there's so many ways that they can leverage their own interests and passions to hold all of the institutions accountable that contribute to these traumas and tragedies that we experience every day, because it doesn't only start and or stop with law enforcement. And I know that's what we're here talking about, but there are so many social determinants of crime and discrimination that lead to those unfortunate incidents and tragedies.
I really want to compliment the effort of RISE and the voice of the players. We have seen a cycle and an interesting conversation in this country around the role and the responsibility of players to stand up on civil rights and social justice issues. I mean, the early moment of 1967, when Muhammad Ali chose to become a conscientious objector to the draft, and he was ultimately supported by a group of professional players put together by Jim Brown. The backstory on that is that those players originally went to Ali in an effort to try to convince him to not be a conscientious objector. But after he talked to them and explained to them what he was doing, they became supporters of his.
Yeah.
They were somewhat torn and hesitant. This is 1967. Civil rights, Vietnam, the year before Dr. King is killed, 2 years after Malcolm X is killed, after Kennedy is killed, and Medgar Evers. I mean, you're talking about a period. And those players stood up. Bill Russell, the Lou Alcindor, Curtis McClinton, and Willie Davis. These guys at that time, Jim Brown was the greatest player in the history of the National Football League. Lou Alcindor was the top.
You may have aged yourself talking about Lou Alcindor.
Yeah, well, I was little, but I was following it. But
you might want to call him by his name so folks know what you mean.
Now we have a LeBron James and many, many others, I'll just say, who have said, we are people. We're not just, quote, high-paid entertainers. We like to play basketball, but these communities are ours. Yeah. Our families live there. Our families still live there. And we are going to stand up, and we're going to do it intelligently. We're going to do it unapologetically. and we're going to do it forthrightly. And that sent a strong message to many athletes, even at the high school and college level, men and women, boys and girls, and also to young people. So I don't want us to capture this moment with the hope that this advocacy is going to continue.
Absolutely. I thank you for that. Listen, I invite anybody, if you don't know the historical importance of the sports community on just progress in this country on social justice issues, one of the things RISE has invested in heavily, and I'm really super proud, one of our first large sponsors was Pepsi, and they helped us to make the entire thing virtual. But we have our Champions of Change up, where folks can go online and you can literally see for the past 100 or so years the impact that the sports community has had on social justice in this country. It is amazing, just the different things that the sports community has done. And I feel honored, Sylvia, to have you on this call, because I do think we often reference male athletes and they have been amazing. But the truth is, I mean, the WNBA just killed this thing and really set stuff off. No, really, as far as like, we're going to have a concrete impact on the social landscape of our country. Just phenomenal. And so I want us to, again, RISE is about, I want to bring folks to understand one another, to connect to people. We want to make sure that we are educating folks, but we also want to make sure that we are empowering folks. I thank Congresswoman Bass because she gave us some examples of things that athletes could do. But I would love for us to finish with, let's talk about some actionable steps that you just believe anybody can take to keep this progress going.
Call your senators.
Yes.
Call senators. The bill already passed the House. Call senators and talk about how important this bill is.
Sylvia, were you going? One thing.
Educate yourself. Educate
yourself. RISE, like I said, this is the first of multiple conversations. We mean for these conversations to be what this one was. If you didn't know about this stuff before you listen to this conversation, you now know it. Educate yourself. There are different ways to educate yourself. True?
Get to know others, particularly getting to know members of law enforcement. That is how we're able to build empathy. I think empathy is one of the missing ingredients that's contributing to so much division. Get to know people on a human level, not just based on what they look like or what they do. Take time to get to know others on a human level.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We're launching programs across the country. We do it with youth and law enforcement, and you guys have supported our work there. We've now run two multi-week sessions, one with high schools and one with middle schools in Minneapolis, doing just that with law enforcement and young people from the community. So thank you. Mark?
Agitate, educate, organize. Agitate, educate, organize.
He's such a lawyer. He thinks if he says it in one sentence, it's one thing.
So, and call your U.S. senators.
Yes.
Call your senators.
Yes.
Well, and I'll give you the number, 202-224-3121. That's the Capitol Switchboard. Call them, ask for your senator, and leave a message.
Give it to us one more time, Mark. Go ahead, say it one more time.
202-224-3121.
Thank you.
He knows it by heart.
I love it. I love it. I thank everyone. I want to be mindful of time. I sincerely want to thank you. One of the things I say to folks is that systems of oppression work when we feel hopeless. The thing we have to do is remain relentlessly optimistic. Keep working, keep moving. Can't stop, won't stop. I thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.